My name's Scott Clary, and I run the Success Story podcast.
What inspired you to create the Success Story podcast?
I think the understanding that not everything has to be rediscovered or reinvented. So, a lot of the things that we try and figure out in our life and our business, they've already been solved by people many times before. And I created the Success Story podcast because I wanted to create something that not only would have helped me earlier on in my career, sort of understanding the playbook of successful people, the wins and the losses, but I figure that if there's utility in this for me, there's utility in this for a lot of other people that are just starting out on their journey. And that's where I think that talking to incredible people, I mean, I do the same thing as you, that really unlocks a lot of wisdom and insight that will benefit somebody who's just getting started in their journey or their career or their business.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about your journey to how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I mean, my journey, I would say that the origin story, I didn't come from an entrepreneurial background. I came from a pretty risk adverse family. How I sort of stumbled into entrepreneurship and even any kind of job outside of a 9 to 5 government job, which is what my parents had and what my dad had, was a mixture of curiosity plus I think a yearning for achieving freedom and fulfillment in my life. And hopefully it doesn't sound too corny, but I feel that a lot of people wake up, they get a job, they go to work, and they don't question this for their entire life. And I saw my parents afford a very good life for me and my brother growing up, but I think that I always was curious about what else could there be? What other things could I accomplish? And that's where sort of entrepreneurship entered the fold. I saw that as a vehicle to build something that was my own, to accomplish whatever my sort of North Star was. And I guess that if you want to go really back, the podcast was sort of the podcast was an evolution of me trying to decide where I wanted to spend my time and energy in a way that it actually fulfilled me. So I've done a lot of different things in my career. I've worked for companies, I've built companies, I've mentored entrepreneurs, I've advised companies, I've invested in companies. So I've done a lot of the different parts of. I've had all the different jobs, if that makes sense, because I was an employee, I was a founder, I was an investor. So there's not really many other parts to a career that you can have. You kind of done all of it, some successfully, some not. And how I started the podcast was me wanting to build something that would outlive the current thing that I was working on. So to give you some context, when I started the podcast, I was still building my last company that was eventually acquired. The reason I wanted to start a podcast was because I felt that every time I started something new or took a new job or tried to build something new, I was building it from scratch. And what the podcast afforded me to do was the opportunity to remove some of the friction in the next thing that I chose to take on. And I think that, I mean, whether or not you call it personal brand building or social selling or whatever the nomenclature is, I think that putting yourself out online, building an online resume, putting together a body of work that attracts a fan base, that builds trust, is a great way to open doors that you never even knew were available to you. And that's what the podcast has done for me. So right now, because of the podcast, obviously you have the audience that tunes in, listens to some incredible interviews. But outside of that, if I ever want to take another job with a company, if I ever want to start another company from scratch, if I ever want to find new companies to invest in, I have people that would hire me because of not only my resume, but also my reach. I can take a new product to market and test it out against new audiences with way less friction than if I had no name and no audience. And if I ever wanted to invest, I have deal flow and access to entrepreneurs that already know my name. So the point is, whatever I choose to take on in the future, the podcast and the personal brand and the audience, it just removes a certain amount of friction. And I think that was the plan going into it, because I didn't really have a specific outcome that I was looking for outside of the fact that I understood that it's one of the 4 points of leverage. The other, it being media, the other one being financial, human capital, or technology. But it's one of the 4 points of leverage that you can significantly use to expand your reach, to make anything you work on much easier. And that's why I started it, and that's why I continue to do it to this day. So if I want to start anything new, I have this jumping off point that I can lean into.
What is it like giving people an avenue to amplify their voice?
Hmm, that's interesting. I enjoy it. I enjoy it because I get to tap into a part of that individual. I get to tap into the part of this individual and understand what they care about the most. I think that's what a good podcast host does. They tap into not like the not like the desires, but I guess the the passions, or I'm trying to think of a good way to say this. You tap into the most meaningful parts of someone's life, and you get to speak to them about it, and you see their eyes light up, and you see them just turn on in a way that, to be honest, I think that it's the best thing I've ever built, because I get sort of firsthand access to wisdom from people that normally I wouldn't have access to, speaking to them about the things that they care most about. And it's very fulfilling. I mean, it's very enjoyable to sit down with some of these people and and go deep on these topics that they care so passionately about, because you can see the passion, so it's a great energy, but also you know that these are these are great lessons that this person has gone through, that's that's going to help the next generation of entrepreneurs or the next generation of builders. So I love it. I mean, it's a very fulfilling job. Obviously, it's a slightly different job than if you were just going to sell a widget or sell a software. It's a very human centric job. Not that any business shouldn't be, but yeah, it's very fulfilling. I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yeah, interviewing people, I say it's my therapy. So it's
Yeah.
just something when I'm learning people talking about their own lives, and then it's very relatable talking to people.
I'll say one more thing too. It also helps me think through some of my own problems, and helps
Yeah.
me, yeah, I think that not only is it serving the audience, but selfishly, this has been the most eye-opening, useful, to your point, therapeutic business that I've ever tried to build.
And while I was doing my research, I saw you have such a large following in a number of different social media outlets. What is it like getting your message out directly to an audience?
I think that it's a means to, so I don't think about the size of the audience so much as the importance of the message.
Yeah.
So it's very nice to have a decent following. I think it kind of validates that the content you're creating and the work that you're doing is good work and good content. Um, but it doesn't it wouldn't like change, for example, if I had a much smaller following, and that's where everybody starts. So the types
Right.
of conversations that I have right now, and the types of podcasts I produce, and the types of newsletters I put out, it's great that it's amplified with the audience, but it's a side effect of doing it for 6 years. That's how I look at it. I think that you have to focus on a leading indicator of success, which is not the size of the audience, which is good conversations, good content, speaking about things that you care about. And when you check all those boxes, again, the byproduct of creating great content will be an audience that's engaged, that loves what you do.
Yeah. What motivates you?
I think what motivates me is creating something that I enjoy creating. It's very simple. I don't overcomplicate my motivation. If I didn't enjoy doing it, I would stop.
Yeah.
But uh, what I just sort of spoke about previously, I enjoy and I learn from every single person that I sit down and speak with. It's a very, it's a wonderful business that I've created, very similar to what you've created. I've never experienced this level of access or insight or wisdom from any other company that I've ever tried to build. So what motivates me is, first of all, am I accomplishing my objective of helping somebody else out on their journey who's a little bit earlier on? Yes, for sure, that is huge for me. And secondly, do I still enjoy it? And I think if you can accomplish both of those two things, then I think that, at least for me, it gives me the energy to carry through when, I'm tired at the end of the day, or it gives me the energy to carry through when I'm not getting, the results or the whatever metric I'm measuring it by. If I'm not growing as fast as I want to grow, like that, those sort of metrics alone allow me to, or not those metrics, those reasons alone allow me to keep going and carrying on, which I think is very important because, as you know, in podcasting, it's a very slow business to grow. It's an
Yeah.
exceptionally slow business to grow. There's a lot of ways to make money a lot easier than podcasting. I would argue that if you don't have a love for the type of content you create, the interviews that you have, you're not going to stick with it because any business you start, to be very fair, I've been doing this for 6 years now. Any business, and when I say business, I define business as like, hey, you're selling a product to a customer
Yeah.
versus you're selling attention or selling audience. But any business where you're selling a product to a customer would make more money for the majority of people than if they just started a podcast. But for me, the benefits of and the enjoyment that I get from this far outweighs selling a product to a customer.
What advice would you give anyone who wants to follow your footsteps?
Well, I think that they have to decide, because I've done a couple different things over my
Yeah.
career. I think that it's important for you to understand your motivations, your North Star, understand why you're doing what you're doing. So don't just start a podcast to start a podcast. Start a podcast, for example. That's what I'm working. That's my sort of what my main focus is right now. If you're going to start a podcast, is it serving your business? Is it a hobby? Is it a pastime? Is it a networking opportunity? What's the reason why you're actually doing it? That's very important because if you do not have the proper motivation or the proper North Star, you won't stick with it for a long enough period of time for it to be successful. Uh, After you have figured out that your North Star is, for whatever reason, the exact same as mine, and you want to sit down with the coolest people in the world, then I think that very tactically, you have to build a system that allows you to predictably show up, same as if you were writing a newsletter, same as if you're putting out TikToks. You have to find a system that's going to allow you to show up and create and distribute, publish and distribute repeatedly so that you do not burn out. I think that's the most important when it comes to content creation because a lot of creators burnout's a real thing. And I think a lot of people jumping into content creation, which is sort of the world that I'm in right now, they don't understand the amount of energy and effort and time it's going to take. So the first step is North Star. Second step is systems and processes that allow you to show up repeatedly. And that could mean batch recording content. That could mean blocking off time weekly. That could mean maybe not putting out as much content as you as you as you think you need to immediately because after 6 months that level of content is unsustainable. So meaning don't put out 3 episodes a week, put out 1 episode a week, put out 1 episode every 2 weeks. Whatever is sustainable, that will lead to winning. And then after you sort of gotten the basics down, you figured out your North Star, you figured out your systems for content creation, then I would start to figure out in content world, how do I market? How do I distribute it? How do I grow the audience? And the answer is podcasting is the same as any other type of business. There isn't an activity that you can do to grow a business that you wouldn't do to grow a podcast, meaning you can run paid ads. You can do collaborations with other podcasters, other influencers. You can SEO a website and drive traffic through there. You can have a content marketing play, and you can clip out a podcast and take one long form podcast and turn it into 1,000 pieces of short form derivative content. So that would be my playbook for getting started in the podcast space. And the secret to success is doing that for the next 10 years. And when you do that for the next 10 years, not saying that I'm not saying that if the podcast isn't growing, you just repeatedly do the things that don't work. But if you commit to it for the next 10 years and you build in these systems of processes, you build in distribution, and you make sure that you don't burn out creatively, financially, whatever, you will find a way to become successful at it. But I think that finding a way to stay in the game long enough is very important.
One of the things you said there, you get to talk to really cool people.
Mm.
What is it like just getting to know them on just not a podcast level, but a human level?
I think you start to realize very quickly that nobody has it 100% figured out, which is that's kind
Right.
of a that's a you've heard this before, but everybody is just trying to figure it out. And even if they've accomplished one thing, it doesn't mean they figured out anything else. I'll give you an example. Like I interview, and I won't name names, but I interview people that have had not only, multi-million dollar exits, people that have had $100 million exits. I've interviewed billionaires on the show. And even if they've figured out one thing, it doesn't mean they figured out their personal relationships. It doesn't mean they figured out their spiritual relationships. Doesn't mean they figured out their mental or their physical health. It doesn't even mean they figured out the next business that they want to build. I know somebody who is on paper a billionaire, and that person had trouble. They wrote a book after they had this massive exit. That person had so much trouble selling that book, they couldn't even cover a $50,000 advance from their publisher, even after having an exit over $1 billion. So the point is, everybody's trying to figure out their life. Everybody's trying to figure out their shit. No one has it 100%, set in stone. So outside of the massive amounts of wisdom and insight that these people bring, you have to realize at the end of the day, anybody who you look up to is just human. And I think that that's a very freeing feeling, because then you start to understand that if one person has been able to quote unquote figure it out, then it's not so impossible for you to be able to figure it out either. But I think that the worst thing we can do is we look up to these people that have had massive success, and we put them on a pedestal, and we say that almost success or achievement, or massive success, massive achievement isn't for us, it's for them. And I think that's a fallacy. I think that's incorrect. And I don't like putting people that have had massive success on pedestals, because if you really break down what they've built, you can actually map out very succinctly the steps they've taken to get there. Yes, luck, timing was a factor for sure, but they are no different than anyone who's listening to this podcast right now. So, whatever you want to accomplish, look at the person that's done it best in your industry and understand that if they've been able to do it, you can too. Use that as motivation and use that as inspiration, but also use that tactically, and with a discerning eye, reverse engineer what they've been able to accomplish. And hopefully that will give you some steps to sort of progress on your own journey. But if you just think of these people that have had massive success as gurus, thought leaders, I'm never going to get there, you're already setting yourself up to fail. So that would be, and they're all incredible, they're all smart, they're all very wise. That's not the point. The point is that they're not so different from you or me.
What do you do to help your own mental health?
What do I do to help my own mental health? I think that for me, getting away from a computer,
Hmm.
movement, working out, lifting weights, going for a walk, very simple things. But I think in a post-COVID world where we got so used to, and I haven't worked in an office in a very long time. Like if I didn't have to leave the house, I would never leave the house, right? Like I could sit behind my computer all day. And I think that it creates isolation, and I think it actually does like a number on your mental health. So for me, it's moving, physical activity, fresh air. Um, that has a huge impact on my mental health. Diet for sure has an impact on my mental health. If I eat like garbage, I feel like shit. I feel like trash. So those two things alone are pretty good. I think that eating like garbage and never leaving your office and never leaving your desk, that's a quick way to feel very depressed and
Yeah.
feel a lot of anxiety and stress. I mean, if you here's another thing that I just do. It's just a habit. I don't think it's. I'm sure there's some psychology around it. I'm not smart enough to understand why it does what it does. But every time I get a stressful email or a stressful call, I immediately will go for a walk, go to the gym before I respond to it. Just give myself some breathing room and some gap to sort of uh, take my mind away from the problem, sort of settle my emotions, think through solutions, and then come back and then deal with it. So action is important, but I think action without giving yourself space to think through problems or to sort of decompress or to remove yourself for a period of time. I think that that is this like little toxic, almost it's like a toxic environment that can really negatively impact your performance. So for mental health, it's movement, it's diet, it's removing myself from the situation, removing myself from stress, and that would be if you aren't doing that right now, I think that's probably the number one thing, easiest thing to start, this afternoon.
Where do you want to see your podcast or mission in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
I want it to stay on the same trajectory as it's on right now. I
Hmm.
enjoy it a lot. Of course, it's nice to say I want it to be, the biggest business podcast in the world, the biggest. I think right now I think we're top 10 in education. That's a category that we sit in right now. We've been in entrepreneurship and business before. We've ranked there, but that's a fun metric to measure success by. I think the more important metric is, am I
Yeah.
still enjoying it? If I'm still enjoying it, then I'm less concerned about those metrics. If I'm still enjoying it, I'm less concerned about where we're ranking, how many downloads, how much revenue, because not because they're not important things. I do believe in, if I'm committing my time and energy and resources and money to something, then there has to be, I can't be like burning all my cash or burning all my energy. But I do believe that if you do enjoy the thing that you're doing, uh, the other things find a way of growing and increasing as well. And I believe that in any business. I do believe that if you are smart, you're an educated person, you learn from your mistakes, you iterate through things that don't work so well, and you stay with it for a long term, and you actually enjoy what you're doing, you'll find a way to make all those other important metrics of quote unquote success available to you. So, yes, I would love it to be one of the largest in the world. I also really want to keep enjoying it. If I keep enjoying it, I have no doubt it'll get there.
So, how can people reach out and learn more?
Well, like if they like podcasts, if they like what we're doing right now, they can go listen to my podcast. It's called Success Story. You can go to successstorypodcast.com. It's available anywhere you can get podcasts, or all the socials the same. It's at Scott D. Clary, and you can find me anywhere.